my name is Andy Tidy and welcome back to another edition of Canal Hunter. In this series we're recreating the old coal trade route that took this precious cargo from the coalfields of Cannock out to its market in Saltley and Small Heath. And this is a small token of the coal which we're seeking to deliver. So far we've been on the contour canal of the Worley and Essington and its subsidiary branches. But now we are jumping forward 40 years in time and we've come to the top of the Rushall Canal. The Rushall Canal is small, it's less than 3 miles long, and it's a contemporary of the Bentley Canal and the Rushall Locks branch. All three were north-south connections created after the amalgamation of the Birmingham Canal and the Worley and Essington Canal Company, and they then became the Birmingham Canal Navigations. You see, the Rushall Branch Canal is a waterway that very nearly didn't happen. It was moved as part of the Tame Valley Canal project. But having got started on the Tame Valley, the BCN kind of had second thoughts and they didn't really think it justified the outlay and the effort. But then the lawyers got involved and they looked at the small print. And the small print of the agreement to build the Tame Valley Canal was that the Rushall branch had to be built, and if it wasn't built, the £60,000 that they'd raised for it had to be given back. Well, no entrepreneur just hands back money, do they? So they proceeded to buy the land and to build this linking canal. In the end, this branch canal was built in 1847 with low expectations of its profitability. Until now we've been coming through the rich thick coal seams and the limestones and the clays, but now we move into 300 million year old Jurassic sandstone, and that contains nothing of any real value. That said, this late addition to the BCN network actually is one of the most attractive corners of the BCN. The canal is largely devoid of bends. It drops pretty much straight through to a point where you would recognise as the junction between the M5 and the M6. And it's got some pretty locks. It's all tree lined, and one day when the Lichfield Canal is finished, it will make a fantastic back entrance into the BCN system. Anyhow, enough of the waffle about this canal. Let's get off and have a look. After the top two locks at Rushall Junction, which you can just see in the far distance beyond the bridges, there follows what is euphemistically referred to as the Mile Straight. And here at Gillety Bridge, which is kind of in the middle, you can turn round and just see lock number 3 in the far distance down below. But that's not really why I stopped here at Gillety Bridge. When I mentioned at the outset that the Rushall Canal was built without any great enthusiasm or indeed anticipation of economic success. That was because the BCN hadn't factored in the amazing coal reserves which were to be found out on the Cannock coalfield, which is where we started our journey. And if proof was needed that there were vast quantities of coal hauled down this branch line, have a look at this. Gillety Bridge stands pretty much as it was built in 1886, and it comes complete with its iron rope guards. And if you look at the rope guards coming down here, this iron is probably about 3 inches thick, and these rope score marks have gone right through to the back end. And the reason for these score marks is because the horses walked well ahead of the narrowboat, so they would have gone around the corner of this bridge before the boats arrived. And as a result, the gritty ropes ground their way through the iron. And then, as they emerged at the far side, it was a repeat performance. And here you can see the other iron straps, this time even more decimated. Now, all this coal trade finished back in the 1960s, so there are precious few people around who remember much about the trade, just 1 or 2 children who can remember their parents on the boats. But the old boaters needed to be able to remember the sequence of locks that took them through from Longwood all the way out to Camp Hill in their market. And they had a little bit of a ditty they used to say. The Moshies 2 and the Ganseys 7, the New 13 and the Lousy 11. And it's going to be the Moshies 2 and the Ganseys 7 that we're going to explore today. The New 13, which is the Perry Barr Locks, they will follow in the next episode. And then finally we'll get on to the Lousy 11, but that's well down the line. Now, truth be told, cycling the canal towpath down the Rushall flight of locks is no better than it was cycling between Aldridge and Longwood, especially on a wet day like today. I haven't fallen off, but it's been awfully slippery, and frankly I haven't got much brakes left, especially on the back. Now you may be wondering why these are not simply called Rushall Locks number 1 through to number 9, and instead the boatmen refer to them as the Moshies 2 and the Ganseys 7. Now, I can't really offer an explanation for why the top 2 are called the Moshies. There may well be some boaters out there who can illuminate me, but I can help you out on the Ganseys. These are the lower 7 locks on the flight, and when they were built they were massively exposed to the biting cold southwesterly winds, a bit like today. But the old boatmen didn't have the benefit of the tree-lined avenue that I've got around me now, nor did they have the benefit of Gore-Tex coats and lovely waterproofs. They had to make do with more rudimentary protection equipment, and their clothing of choice were special oil impregnated heavy jumpers, and these jumpers were made in Guernsey, and in typical boatman fashion they tangled up the name and Guernsey became Gansey. Now, sadly, all the birdsong that we enjoyed further up the Rushall flight has given way to the constant drone of the M6, which is running right behind me. It's the permanent backdrop to this junction. Well, so far in season 4 of Canal Hunter, we have stuck exclusively to the Wolverhampton level of the BCN. That's effectively the highest of the 3 main levels. And that level is maintained all the way around from Smethwick through Tipton, out to Wolverhampton, across to Walsall, through Cannock, and then finally around to Aldridge. The canal clings to this high ridge, which is the peripheral rim of the River Tame catchment basin. But by the time you reach Longwood and Hayhead, we've run out of altitude. That ridge runs out at Barbeacon, and so the canal just has to drop down. And it's now dropped down through its 9 locks onto the Walsall level, which is the lowest of the 3. The Tame Valley Canal, as built, is 8.5 miles long, built in 1844, just 3 years before the Rushall Canal behind me. And its route was to connect the Black Country out at near Tipton through to what you now know as Spaghetti Junction. And like its successor, the M6 toll, it was built in response to chronic overcrowding on the original main line. By the time this canal was built, the Farmers Bridge locks were hopelessly overloaded. They were running 24/7, and they were piling 5,000 boats through those locks every month. Compare that to today's Hill Morton locks, which are the heaviest used locks on the canal system, which run at just over 10,000 a year. Now, the Tame Valley was probably never as successful as they hoped. In the end, it carried about 600 to 800 boats a month, but it was enough to justify its construction. Crucially, for the purposes of this tale, it is an essential link in our journey from the Cannock coalfields out to the coal markets of East Birmingham. The canal line had been proposed for years, but as is so often the case with any civil engineering project, there were opposition, and the opposition mostly came from the landowners who didn't want their land overlaid with an old canal. What's more, most of the canals went through mineral-rich areas, so they could tap into the coal and the clay that existed along their line. But when they built it, they weren't aware of any particular minerals along this route. What the BCN was acutely aware of was the danger of competition. You see, before they merged with the Worley and Essington, there was always this possibility that another canal company could build a route into the Black Country coming up alongside the River Tame. But of course, once the merger went through with the Worley and Essington and they built their north-south connecting canals, that effectively blocked any kind of potential competition by another canal coming along this route. James Walker was the engineer responsible for this particular canal. He also went on to engineer the Walsall locks, the Bentley Canal, and then finally the straightenings and the Netherton Tunnel itself. His approach to building canals was to take a leaf out of these newfangled railways. He built high embankments and he dug deep cuttings. He also put towpaths on both sides of the canal, and he made the bridges wide enough so that 2 boats could pass in them if needs be. These days, it's the southern towpath which is the one which is kept in good repair. In fact, we've come back onto the National Cycleway network, which makes this route much more comfortable. Anyway, all this nattering about the origins and the history of the Tame Valley and its connection to the Rushall Canal isn't getting this load on anywhere. So I think we need to get on and get our way to Perry Barr Lock as soon as we can. We've come to a point on the Tame Valley which is very close to the old Hampstead Colliery, and because the canal rides on a very tall embankment, there had to be some way of putting in an automatic flood prevention scheme, and to do this they had two gates that swung out, one from each side, and you can still see the hinge for one over there, and the gate was recessed into the gap, and if the water spilled out the gate could swing back across automatically, slam shut and protect the rest of the canal from draining out into the surrounding area. I would have liked to stand there and explain a bit about the Hampstead Colliery to you, but this stretch of canal really is living up to the Guernsey's name. It's blowing an absolute gale and it's freezing cold. Luckily, the canal is built in some ways very similar to the Shropshire Union, in that it's got these deep cuttings like the one I'm in now, followed by equally high, enormous embankments. Well, now, I mentioned that we came past the area of Hampstead Colliery. It was the viewpoint where you could see the surrounding hills all the way out to Netherton and Tipton. Well, just north of Spouthouse Lane there used to be two basins, and they were loading basins for the Hampstead Colliery. Ah, you're thinking, the Hampstead Colliery, so they did find coal after all. Well, yes and no. You see, at the minute I'm standing in the middle of a cutting made up of 200 million year old Triassic sandstone, and the 300 million year old coal measures lie underneath, and to get at this coal they had to dig through nearly 2,000 feet of overburden. And it's worth bearing in mind that this same thick coal seam that they were accessing 2,000 feet down actually cropped out right on the surface in the Braidley area that we looked at in season 2. So the users of coal in this area really were desperate for the product. No wonder they embraced the exploitation of the Cannock coalfield with such enthusiasm. All wasn't plain sailing though, because only 30 years after the pit was sunk, it suffered a catastrophic explosion which resulted in the loss of 24 miners' lives. Initially the mine closed and 600 men lost their jobs, but in due course the lure of the black gold was irresistible. So eventually the pit was reopened, and by the 1930s it was pouring out 250,000 tonnes every year. Now this may have been the deepest and one of the longest lasting mines in the Black Country, but eventually it too was played out and it was closed down in the early 1960s. But anyhow, that tale brings us along to the top of the Perry Barr Locks. Well, we're at Perry Barr Locks, which in boater parlance is the new 13, and it's the top of a series of steps which takes the canal down 106 feet. But as far as this week's episode of Canal Hunter is concerned, this is the end of the line. Perry Barr Locks can wait for another day. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Canal Hunter, as we've explored the old line of the Rushall branch canal through its locks and to its junction with Tame Valley, and then along 2 or 3 miles of the Tame Valley as far as the Perry Barr Locks. There's probably another 2 or 3 miles to go before we reach Salford Junction, but that can wait till the next episode. So for now, hope you've enjoyed it, happy hunting, and I'll see you soon. Cheerio.